Hi, welcome to the Better Ways podcast. I'm Tom.
And I'm Jamie. Nice to see you.
Hi, Jamie. Good to see you. Has it been a slow week? I think it's been nothing on, has it? I mean,
No,
nothing at all involving public broadcasters and sports personalities.
no. You think with everything going on in the world, the British public would have more things to talk about than an ex-footballer slash current football presenter versus
Mm,
the British government. But
yeah, yeah, you'd think
yeah,
so. So
yeah.
let's have a quick look at what started it all. Um, so let's just get that visible. Can you see that?
I can, yeah.
Yeah. So this was Gary's comment, replying to somebody else who was talking about there's no huge influx. We take far fewer refugees than other major European countries. This is just an immeasurably cruel policy directed at the most vulnerable people in language that is not dissimilar to that used by Germany in the 1930s. And I'm the one out of order.
Mm,
So if we look at what he's saying, there's some truth in that because that we do take
mm,
fewer refugees.
mm,
I had a look at the stats, and if you look, this is for 2022. This is
mm,
UNHCR, so I assume this is reputable.
mm.
You never know. Um, it looks like Germany and France take a lot more
Yeah,
on
they
it,
do, don't they?
they've had more applications. Spain as well take more than us, and this is not accounting for population.
Mm, mm,
Um, I was surprised about Mexico, Costa Rica, and Russia.
mm.
I probably wasn't surprised about the US,
No, no, they take a lot of people in.
examples, but we're better than Italy and Canada. Um,
Canada, that's remarkable. Canada's got
so
such a reputation, isn't it, being a liberal haven and
yes,
great
yes,
place, and
yes.
they do
It's,
bugger all. Yeah.
so yes, we're better. I mean, perhaps not by head,
Mm,
but now if you look at the rest of the tweet, it's an immeasurably cruel policy. So he's talking about the changes to the law
mm,
about making it illegal for people to come via the small boats. So unless they arrive legally,
mm,
they will automatically have their application turned down.
mm,
Directed at the most vulnerable people in language not dissimilar to that used by Germany in the 30s. Um, now that's, I think it's the last bit that's created all the controversy.
yeah. Yeah.
So Germany in the 30s, what do we know? We know
Hmm,
that the Nazis were in power.
mm,
We know that Hitler came to power. He started to rise in the 20s. We know by the 30s the Nazis were getting stronger and stronger. And during the 30s they took over, became the government. And then lots of things changed in Germany. Um,
mm,
now a lot of people have taken that comment and said he hasn't said Nazis. Um, but I think if you look at change what's going on in Germany in the 1930s, it would be
mm.
indivisible in most people's minds from what the Nazis were trying to introduce.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think it is an obvious implication of it.
Yeah.
Um, but of
He
course,
may have
lots
meant it more subtly,
he
as in
may
he
have
may
meant
have
it
meant,
more subtly,
yeah,
but it
but
wasn't
the way people have taken it,
clear.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Now, lots of things were happening in Germany. I mean, as well as there's a couple of interesting things. One is that the situation isn't quite the same because it wasn't that there were lots of refugees coming into Germany. What the Nazis were doing was persecuting the citizens who were Jewish,
Yeah.
who were already there, already settled citizens, already German citizens, already part
Mm,
of the. So there's a difference there. And obviously, in Germany, lots of things were changing in the 30s. There was a lot of prosperity, economic growth, motorways, improvements to health, as well as the oppression of
mm.
people that started and gathered pace and ultimately took over everything.
And a
Um,
lot of national anger as well.
and a lot of national anger as to how the Germans had been treated
Mm,
after the First World War and the huge
mm.
reparations and punishments that were put on them, which I think most people who've read Hitler's life story understand
Yeah.
that's what created him,
Yeah.
as much
Can
as
I
his own choices is the history.
can I do a very quick interjection there because I will
Yes,
forget, and you set it
yes.
up perfectly. And Tom, you should read this book. I don't even know if it's
Mm.
still in print, but I stumbled across it 10 plus years ago. It's called The Making of the Führer.
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
And I don't think, have you heard of it?
I've heard the title. I haven't read it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's based on a slightly odd theory, which seems to have some evidence to back it. That when Hitler was a soldier in World War One, he
Yeah.
was injured and lost his sight,
Yes.
and they realised there was nothing medically wrong with him, so they thought it was psychological. So they sent him to a hypnotherapist,
Right.
and there's a basically like a script that they think they discovered it or something like that, and it was about how he could be one of the people that was destined to
Yeah.
lead Germany to greatness. So they think that this therapist who helped him recover his sight may have actually set him on the course to be the world-changing
Okay.
tyrant
Right. Yeah. I
that
didn't
he
know that.
became. Yeah, and then the
Yeah.
therapist
Yeah. Yeah.
was murdered
Yes.
after Hitler came
Okay.
to power.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
anyway, so it's fascinating that because that's like if that's true, considering what you and I have studied, that's quite dark. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's yeah, that's absolutely fascinating. I'm going to have to read that now.
Mm.
But yeah, so obviously, Gary isn't saying what language he's referring to, and what changes.
Mm.
So it's fairly ambiguous as well as to what he's pointing to. So I think you've ended up with this ambiguous tweet, which has been interpreted by people as how they want it to be interpreted.
Yeah, absolutely.
Clearly, he's not happy about the policy. Clearly, he thinks this is detrimental to desperate people who are trying to escape something horrendous. And then you get into the whole debate about, are these actually refugees or are they economic migrants? What percentage of them are true refugees versus what percentage are people who are trying to come for a better life? But actually, home life isn't that bad. How much is it driven by the traffickers? With the promises they make, the information they give people.
And the Albanian gangs, etc.
Yeah. Now, for me, the totally ironic thing is we've not been talking about any of that in the media. We've been talking about whether or not Gary should be on Match of the Day and whether or not the BBC chairman should stand down.
Yeah.
And so the all of this has not resulted in exploring the topic. Has not resulted in actual debate and discussion. We haven't had, which I think would have been the best response, would have been Gary Lineker on a debate with maybe one or two other people from his side of things and people opposite, and then spend an hour to 2 hours to debating the issue.
Absolutely right.
I have no idea if he'd be willing to do that, but as he feels so passionately, it would be good to hear what he has to say about why he has to say it.
You're right, 100% right. Everything you said there is absolutely nail on the head. People have taken this in ways that benefits their cause, basically. So if you're anti this government, this is just further proof that how evil and horrible they are. If you think the BBC is a spineless entity enthralled to Tory paymasters, then this is going to back up what you believe. If you believe the BBC is a left-wing hub of Marxist drivel, then the fact that they back down is going to reinforce your belief on that. Yeah. And do you know what? It's left to the people that are considered almost like fringe voices, and I'd say a certain sensible group in the middle that go, hang on a minute, put that nonsense that he has said aside for a moment. And I think it was, who was it? Was it Julia? It might have been Julia Hartley-Brewer or someone else. It might actually have been Nigel. I think it was Nigel Farage even. Maybe I could be wrong.
Right.
But he said, "What do you want to do about it?
Yeah.
So, what is your answer to solving this problem? What is it? Because you can't just say this plan is bad if you don't have a plan that would work in its case." And people go, "Okay, well we should have legal means for asylum seekers to come," which I genuinely agree with. Then follow-up questions: how many?
Yes,
from where?
Yes.
And but we're not, like you said, we're not having those conversations.
We're not having that proper debate. Yeah.
No, and the British people, and the polls that came out were pretty crazy. I think that's probably a bit surprising to some. Showed that actually 56% of people agreed with the government's policy.
Right. Yeah.
That's crazy. So that's like more than just your traditional Tory voter. That's a lot of centrists and probably some Labour voters as well. Yeah. And I think that makes unpleasant reading to certain people that want to demonise the government. So how do you? It's marrying it all up together, isn't it? Making sense from it, tied in with the whole. Do BBC presenters have a right to have a personal opinion? And yes, they do. But there's the line. So
there's other things to say, which again, it all depends on who you're talking about. So we have actually in the last year taken a huge number of refugees, which are not reflected in those figures. We've taken a very large number from Ukraine.
Mm.
We've taken quite a few from Afghanistan, and we've taken a lot
Mm.
from Hong Kong.
Hong Kong, yeah.
And that actually is in the hundreds of thousands. I think it's something like 400,000, if you
Is
add
it
all this,
really?
something like that. Um,
Wow.
and so that's one factor, which is,
Mm.
so when he says we don't take enough, I think there's a debate to be had. Do we? Maybe
Mm.
we haven't historically. What's the right number? Should we
Mm.
aim to be the same as who?
Mm.
Or do we have what's our criteria for deciding how many we take? What's the limit?
Mm.
Is there a limit?
Mm.
The other is it's hard to tell with some groups because, particularly the people coming over in boats, they come over with no documentation deliberately.
Yeah.
They won't tell you how old they are, where they're from, what nationality they are,
They'll say
even
they're
what
gay and
ethnicity
they're
they are.
persecuted.
They'll say
Yeah.
whatever they think will
Yeah.
get them in.
Yeah.
And they're trained to do that by the traffickers.
Mm.
So this idea of somebody arriving and then you know that they're a refugee or,
Yeah.
um, assessing a valid claim, I think is really quite hard in
I
many
agree.
cases. And absolutely, I think we've had a system that's been shockingly slow and poorly run,
Mm.
but it is a difficult problem. And again, what
Mm.
number of people do you scale up for?
Mm.
And if you allow the illegal route, you do encourage it because I think we've
You
seen
do.
this in the US that if you open the border,
Mm.
you get people making a huge pilgrimage because they think
Mm.
they can just walk in and they'll get their better life for free.
Yeah.
And a country the size of the US can perhaps absorb far more people than we could.
The weekend. Yeah.
But again, there's no debate. We need a debate about
Yeah.
what is the right number,
Yeah.
and also where they're distributed, because I think there are parts of the country that have been disproportionately affected, particularly Kent, the south coast.
Yeah.
Um,
London as well.
they
Yeah.
haven't placed people very evenly across the country,
No.
and so and then of course people disperse themselves.
Yeah.
So I think that's the real shame for me. There hasn't been an actual debate about the issue. I kind of get what Gary is saying,
Mm.
but logically to me, you couldn't have everybody come here, and then somebody, people will say, well, they don't all try and come here, but
Yeah. Yeah.
watch the numbers go up if you declare the policy as anyone can come here.
Exactly. And that.
But so how far do you go, and what are the ground rules, and what's a justifiable case? When is it a refugee? When do people qualify as a refugee? Would also be a good debate to have.
Yeah.
Does
Yeah.
it have to be an active war? Are there other circumstances than war? What about famine or other natural disaster?
Yeah. Social movements, e.g.,
Yeah,
homosexuality.
and if there's too many things, maybe again, are there still numerical limits to that?
Yeah.
So
Konstantin Kissin said this, didn't he? He goes, there is a really simple way to deal, and again, he was trying to get into the detail, and he said there's a very simple way to cut out. They reckon 1/3 of asylum seekers are actually Albanian men,
young men, yeah.
for whatever, and and he just declare Albania a safe country, and your asylum claim is automatically rejected.
Yeah, if you can prove that's where they're from, but yes.
If you can prove it's where they're from,
Not always easy.
No, not at all. Very difficult. We can't tell what age footballers are when they come from developing worlds a lot of the time, so it's difficult.
There is no nationality of birth genetic test.
No, there isn't. No, and it's a bit intrusive to do tooth checks to see how old you think someone is and stuff. That's a bit.
Yeah, I imagine you could probably age people with some advanced technique, but I don't see how you could know.
Intrusive.
I don't see how you could know which country they're from.
No, but Nigel Farage, I hate quoting him because I disagree with so much of what he says. But he was on, I think it was Good Morning Britain or something like that, and and I think they were talking about Brexit. And even he admitted it's been a bit of a cluster, the last few years. But obviously he blamed the incumbent government and said they've made a hash of it. John Bercow was on the other side, and he was like, Nigel, no one could have made this work, blah, blah, blah. It was got a bit, bit bitchy back and forth and so on. But they asked him, they said, Nigel, during the last election, you didn't run against any Conservative candidates. You made sure of that. You only ran against Labour, etc., etc. He goes, will you do the same thing now? And he went, absolutely not. We're going to run everywhere that we think we can win.
Yeah.
Now, this again, going back to the main point, the Gary Lineker and the asylum seeking issue, and going back to that poll, 56% of people believe that the government's immigration and asylum policy is the right one. If someone like Nigel Farage runs on that, and if someone like the Greens opposes that and
Mm.
goes along the more open borders, endless numbers, which, by the way, they never articulate, but is
Yeah.
kind of what they
Yeah.
believe. This could, I never thought this would be a driving issue in the next election, but
Yeah.
I think it's been inflated so
Mm.
much by what's happened with Gary Lineker. I think it
Mm.
will be one of a number of factors that come in the next election. And
Mm.
it wouldn't surprise me to see, maybe the Tories get decimated, but to see was it Reclaim UK? Is it his party? I think Reform UK. Reclaim. I can't
Uh,
remember.
so Reform and Reclaim are the two parties. Um, Reform, I
That was
think.
the Labour outcasts, wasn't it? Yeah, it
Yeah,
was.
I'm trying to
Yeah.
think. There's one which is Lawrence Fox, and the other
Oh, I
one.
see.
Yeah, I get them mixed up.
Yeah, I do as well. Yeah, but I think a party that uh, if you're on the right side of if you're on the right hand side of politics and you bring this up now, I think you're going to get more public support than what the Gary Linekers of the world think.
Yeah.
So,
So
and I
Reclaim is
think
Lawrence Fox.
right. So what was Nigel
And
Farage? Oh, was it? I can't remember.
Reform. It's Reform.
It was Reform. It was Reform.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, right. So this
And
is
that's
interesting.
gone.
Yeah, this is interesting because let's face it, a lot of the social media has been on the side of Gary Lineker. A lot of the sporting and celebrities have been on the side of Gary Lineker. But if that
Yeah.
poll is accurate and 56% of people think the government are in the right here,
Hmm.
that's a massive wake-up call come election time, isn't it? Because if you're a Greens party or a
Yeah.
Lib Dem party or an SNP party and you go on the whole open migration,
Hmm.
open asylum
Hmm.
thing, I think that's going to be a difficult sell to the public. So Gary Lineker may have
Yes.
done them a disservice by
Well,
bringing
maybe.
this into the public
I
consciousness.
I think it all depends who you are. So I
Mm,
think if you and where you live. So if you haven't been impacted by asylum and immigration
mm,
in a negative way, if you're well off, if maybe immigration has allowed you to have employ people to do
mm,
things in your house around your house cheaply, then I
mm,
think you're likely to be highly in favour of it.
mm,
Um, on the other hand, if you are on a low income, if your industry has collapsed, if your rates of pay have halved, if you've suffered it from lots of competition of
mm,
lower unskilled labour coming in
mm,
and taking work and your job away, then you're likely to feel. And if you live in an area which has had a large number of people come in
mm,
and put pressure on the services, then I think you're likely to be strongly against.
mm.
Um, and I suppose with celebrities, this is not something that really impacts their lives negatively.
No,
I think Gary is to be applauded for having housed refugees in the
exactly reason.
past.
Yeah,
However,
100%.
with his resources, I'm sure that has not
Yeah,
been a strain.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
I
Smart.
don't doubt his sincerity and
Yeah,
his motives. But there's no doubt that he wasn't struggling to pay for the refugees who
yeah.
stayed with him. Um,
I agree.
and so I think that's a big part of it. Um, but as to how much immigration really, yes, that those polls come up, but how much does immigration really decide elections? I think it's generally quite small.
Mm,
It's lower on people's lists of
mm.
priorities than inflation, economy, wages, taxes, the big macro things. So I wouldn't be surprised if at the next election those still dominate. And we've yet to see Reform or the Brexit Party or before that UKIP win any seats.
No,
So
they haven't. No, and they won't unless proportional
yeah,
representation goes. But what
yeah,
you said there about the key factors, you're right because I mean, again, I saw a poll. What's most important to
yeah,
you, and it was both pre and post Brexit. And pre Brexit, actually, migration was really
mm,
high on people's
mm,
priorities. After Brexit, ironically, people now feel like they've got control, even though the numbers have exploded massively more. It's
yeah.
far less important. And obviously now it's going to be cost of living and and all those things. But yeah, I don't know. The country has a number of questions that it needs to ask itself,
Mm.
and we are at that stage where we need to have really honest
Well,
conversations
this is the
that may
thing.
seem unpalatable.
But we're not having these debates. All we
No,
seem to do is have people on like Farage, and then somebody going on about how awful Farage is, and then
yeah,
you just get these competing. They're not actually talking about the issue.
yeah,
I
no,
mean,
they're not.
to be fair to Nigel Farage, he has tried to highlight what he thinks the problems are,
Mm,
but we seem to be unable to have a debate about it in depth. And it's just become caricatured a bit. And I suppose this is what rubs some people up the wrong way with Gary's comments, which is that you're a bad person if you don't believe in letting people in, regardless. It's a sort of implication. I'm not sure that's what he was trying to say, but that's the sort of implication people take from the fuss about it.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it is. Did you see Douglas Murray was in Doha the other day? And
I didn't.
Again, he's one of those people who's very Marmite, and he said some outrageous thing, but actually, when you see him in a debate, he's incredibly impressive, like incredibly impressive. Like, he's probably one of the most impressive people I've seen, and his opponent was a Qatari, because Doha is Qatar, isn't it? I think yes, it is. Doha is Qatar. So his opponent, for want of a better term, was a Qatari lady. She was also the host of the show, I think. And it's in front of a live audience, so obviously people are paid to go and see it. And she was talking about the West's responsibility to refugees.
Yeah.
And it was quite heart wrenching. It was really hard. They played an audio of basically an inflatable or a really rickety boat that was sinking somewhere in the Mediterranean, and they played the call. And it was a guy, I think you couldn't tell who he was from, somewhere in the Middle East, I think. Yep. And he was going, look, boat is sinking, women, children dying, and they were like, they responded in English. I think the Italians responded going, call Malta. Call Malta. Who do you call in Malta? Where do you find that? There's not, that number. And Malta went, call Italy. Call Italy.
Right,
so
right. They got passed around.
Yeah. And it was a tragedy. I think loads of people did end up dying. Yeah. And she put this on Douglas as if the West has a responsibility. Because let's face it, we've destroyed a lot of the Middle East, and we do have a huge amount of responsibility there. And Douglas didn't deny that. But what he did quite well was, and again, it's something that I think gets overlooked too much in the scheme of things. He turned it around and goes, these people have got far more, in that particular example, Middle Eastern refugees. He goes, these people have got far more in common with other Middle Eastern states than they do with Europe. And he said Turkey, for example, has taken in a huge amount of refugees.
Taken a lot.
Like, over 1 million, I think. He goes, but Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, all of these places, he goes, they don't take in any. Not at all. He goes, they've got huge amounts of wealth, lots of lands, still, relatively speaking. And he goes, they don't take in anyone because no one asked the question as to why they're not taking anyone in. Why is the onus purely on the West? Why is the onus not on these other countries as well? And again, that's one of those sensible.
It's the neighbourhood argument, isn't it? Yes.
Yeah.
It's the argument that if people have to leave their homes, they're best to go somewhere local, the next door country, because then it's a similar culture and it's not too far to come back, etc.
It's safer to get there and so on. Yeah, absolutely right.
Yeah, I mean, it's a convenient. It is a convenient argument when you're an island, a long way away from poverty.
That's very true.
But there is some truth in it. I mean, we, and by we I mean the UK, have a heck of a lot to answer for historically in the Middle East and in most of the world.
We do.
But again, it doesn't mean that we are the only solution to these problems. So I'll have to check that debate out. And
I can't remember which one it was, but it was interesting because I've had a reminder recently, about the importance of kindness, caring, and compassion, and I think it is. In this world, you do get inundated with almost I think it's called like doom pornography, where it's just one tragedy after another, and compassion runs out.
It's a very well-old media technique to personalise a story to a young girl, abandoned or something, and then she's on a boat, and you tell a story, and it's and it can make it emotionally more powerful than it otherwise would be. But there's no doubt there's terrible things happening.
Horrendous.
The question is what to do about them. And I think that's what all I'm saying is I'd like to see that debate happening.
Well, I agree with you 100%.
Rather than
back and forth with BBC
I don't really care who presents Match Today. I don't really care if Gary Lineker paid $1.5 million. Well, you do. You like football more than I do. I don't really care how much Gary Lineker's paid. I might have a view about whether or not the BBC should pay him that, but it doesn't really matter. And I think it's absurd to try and stop people from expressing their opinions. Agree. But none of that really matters. That conversation is not as important as how do we come up with a better solution. But I don't know this in this country. There seems to be I don't know if there's a fear behind it or an inability to. If we we can't go there, we can't have the debate.
Mm,
We can
mm,
only virtue signal from either side.
yeah,
We either want
that's it.
nobody or we want everybody.
Well, that's yeah. No, but that's because it's
Yeah,
easy, isn't it, Tom? It's very easy to destroy. It's very easy to criticize. It's much, much,
yeah,
much
yeah.
harder
It's a
to build.
it's a
Yeah,
complicated issue that isn't solved
yeah.
overnight and requires
And there's no perfect
sustained attention.
solution.
No, but
There is no perfect solution.
that's what we should be having national debates
Yeah,
about.
I agree. I
Um,
totally agree.
and
There's only
again,
one solution.
same thing with Brexit. The conversation shouldn't be should we be in or out. The conversation should be what kind of country do we want,
Mm,
right? What do how do we actually want to operate? If we want to change our laws and do things ourselves in certain ways, what are those ways?
mm,
And if that's the case, then yeah, you need to be free to do that. But if we're not going
mm,
to, then,
mm. Yeah.
so the conversation doesn't start with should we be in the EU or not. The conversation starts with where are we going and what kind of country do you want to be and what opportunities do we see, and then you look at okay, how do you get there? What do you need to do?
Mm.
And
That's
I
a
don't
lot
think
to
we have
ask.
that kind of conversation either because it's easy to say in or out.
Yeah, that's a lot to ask of us, Tom. That's a lot of thinking and a lot of
All right,
research.
yeah, yeah.
And let's
Well,
face it,
they're not
none of
simple
us.
issues.
No, they're not. But none of us have like all the answers. And
No.
I got into a bit of a like not a tangle.
Hmm.
That's the wrong term. I had a bit of disagreement with So I posted an article, and it was
Mm.
I won't mention names, but it was I think, and it said I don't know how accurate the article was, but it was something along the
Yeah.
lines of rates of depression are much higher among liberal
Mm.
women than they
Yeah.
are among conservatives, and so liberal women are
Right.
basically
Right.
the
Right.
highest group.
Right.
And I made a
I knew
comment,
it
and I
was
said, actually,
worse for women in general than men, but yeah.
yes, correct, yeah,
Not
and
suicide rates, but depression
no,
rates.
depression,
Men
yeah,
are much better at killing themselves,
yes,
but
yeah.
women are more depressed. Yeah.
Correct, yeah. And I said, well, actually, that ties in with my experience because some of the people that I know who are some of the very strong activist types, like incredibly strong activist types, have huge amount of issues, like
Mm.
huge amount of issues. They can't get their own house in order, let
Yeah.
alone try and fix anything else. And
Yeah.
if there's,
Yeah.
and I've noticed those two go hand in
Well.
hand
Yeah.
quite a lot.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, this
And
is go on.
and when I posted that
Mm.
article, someone came back, very polite, get on really well with this person, but she was like, oh, she misinterpreted it. She goes, oh, this is
Mm.
just a right wing attack vector and so on.
Mm.
And I said, well, look, no, because the research does show that. And I said, I think the reason for it is probably because of levels of empathy. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's levels of
Yeah.
empathy.
High
If you have
empathy.
higher
Yes.
levels of empathy, you're
You
much more
feel.
likely
Yeah.
to feel the pain of the
You
world.
feel a lot of other people's pain. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And she goes, well, look, all you need to know about mental health is in this book, and sent me
Oh,
the
okay.
link to this book. And
How nice.
I replied going, I don't think one book has it all covered because this is a
Yeah.
very wide thing. I was
Mm.
like, so if we can't even get that right, there's no way we can get the big questions with 100% accuracy. It's not. It's trial and error as you go along.
Yeah.
That's
So
all life.
I'm not talking about accuracy. I'm just talking about talking about them would be a start.
The conversation. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's much easier to shout that.
Rather than just shouting it answers at,
Yeah.
or positions at each other. Um,
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that's the way to progress them. Otherwise, you're just going to get a bad solution from the left, followed by a bad solution on the right,
Yeah.
followed by another bad solution from the left. Action, reaction, overreaction.
Yeah. With nothing
Um,
being done or
Nothing
accomplished.
being done.
Mm.
But I think immigration and asylum is the one we talk about the least.
Yeah.
In terms of actually what we should do about it. The government's
Mm.
been fairly hopeless at dealing with it, but
Long grass.
um,
Kick it into long grass. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
but it's something that is important. I mean, I agree with Gary. It's an important issue.
Mm.
Um,
So,
but hey
so we
ho,
don't know is the answer.
we don't
We don't
know.
know. There's
That's,
only one solution to all this, Tom, is that you and I become co-kings
no,
of the
no, no, no,
country,
no, no,
and
no,
then we try and figure it out as we go along.
no,
I think we'll
absolutely
do a
not.
better job of it than most.
But Pat, I don't want that, and it would completely corrupt me. Um,
Yeah, power does
I'll,
corrupt. Yeah,
I'll influence behind the throne, I think.
fair enough. So, and I don't want to be. I don't like public speaking, so we'll have to get someone else to
Well,
come in and
yeah.
do that bit. Yeah, there we are.
All right then. Well, good
Cool.
talking to you,
You do indeed. Yeah,
and talk to you soon. We'll catch up when the
absolutely.
next controversy arises.
Yeah, it won't be long.
Okay. Cheers, Jamie.
See you later. Bye bye.
Bye.